Welcome to WRM, Work Relationships Matter. I am the Edward Jones, your host and a certified life coach. My motto, work relationships work for those who work on them. My guest today is Darryl Jenkins. He was an area manager for AT&T for NorCal for 34 years. Welcome, Darryl.
Welcome, man. Thank you for inviting me.
It's a pleasure, and I've known you for a while, but this is the first time I get to actually go deeper with you about your work experiences.
Okay.
Now, you've had a successful career, but before we get into that, give me some background, how you grew up and kind of what led you to where you are today.
Well, it's interesting when you ask that question. First of all, thank you for inviting
You
me to talk about my life. I mean, this was an important thought process that I had to go through to come up with thinking about leadership. So I'm going, and how did I get here in these positions? But my challenges in life were huge. And the fact that when I was third grade, I got polio.
Mm,
And so polio got me into a position where I had to go and get shots and go into rehab. And then I learned how to help others. There's only two of us that out of all these hundreds of kids in Children's Hospital down in Southern California that really were able to move around. Most people, we would call it freeze up, and they would
mm,
become stiff and they were crippled for the rest of their lives. So, you're waiting on that to happen to you. But I was getting shots every day from polio, and it was really interesting to give me a challenge to survive and learn how to persevere through all of that. And then when I came out, then I was short. I was only 5'4" for most of my life. I'm now
mm.
6'2", but when I was in senior in getting ready to be a senior in high school, I was so depressed that I was 5'4", and all the girls had gotten taller than me, all the guys had gotten taller than me. And I went to my mother one day and just put my arm around her and says, "Mom, am I ever gonna grow?" And she turned to me and said, "Yeah, you're gonna grow. You'll be as tall as your dad." And my dad was 6 something. So when
Mm.
she told me that, man, my whole world changed. So the first thing I learned is how to believe in somebody's word and believe in yourself. And that summer, I went from 5'4" to 6 feet. Went from
Mm.
B
Wow.
football to
Mm-hmm.
varsity. And that's when adversity first challenged me because they called me in and said, "Darryl, you can't be a B anymore. You got to be varsity." And they
Mm-hmm.
took me out and lined me up in front of the whole varsity squad, and I had to play
Mm-hmm.
middle linebacker in front of every against the whole varsity first string, and tackle somebody trying to come through the line. And that was
Mm-hmm.
bigger than I'd ever imagined, but I did it, and I was successful, and made first string on varsity football. So
Great.
that was the first challenge of being successful.
Okay, well, that is great. So now moving into your world of work and that dealing with adversity, that is quite a story there. So that really sets you up for life for dealing with things in the future. Because I always say how you deal with one situation will determine how you'll deal with the next situation.
Yeah.
So you deal with that first one in life, so that prepares you for dealing with the next one. So let's talk about the career you had with AT&T. Did you choose your career or did your career choose you?
That's interesting. That's a great question. Um, I wanted just to want to get ahead. I was a gas man. I was the proverbial gas man. And one day up under a house, this older guy who did the same job that I did asked me a question. He says, "Are you going to do this for the rest of your life?" And he says, "Are you going to be like me? I'm X number age and I'm under a house fixing furnaces, serving gas appliances." And it dawned on me that, hey, this is not where I wanted to be. So the company offered. I had 2 years of college and I hadn't finished, and they offered me an opportunity to finish my undergraduate degree at Pepperdine University School of Business and Management. I hadn't decided what I was going to do for the rest of my life, and they were going to pay for it. And I said, I like management. I like business management. And so I took it. It was a struggle that I made it working and going to school. And so when I finished, I asked them what did they have plans for me to do, the company, since they had paid for this, and they really it was still racist, and so they hadn't really worked on any plans for me, nothing. And when all the things I learned about business, when I asked for to see my personnel folder for review, they'd never showed me my annual reports or anything. And I saw that there was nothing there. There was nothing. And they were scurrying, trying to put all this stuff together. As a matter of fact, I had a major lawsuit, and I just was nice because they paid for my college. So what I did, I started playing around and doing different jobs, learning. I said, well, I figure out there's two departments. There's distribution, where you see the guys digging up the street with the jackhammers and all that. And there's customer service, the people who come in and service the appliances. So I was in customer service. So I was taking a backseat job by going into distribution. But I said, if I know, as a Black man, if I know both sides of the business, I could actually be president of the company. That's what hit my head. And so I transferred into distribution, and I'm digging up the streets and, doing all this stuff and taking all my training. And so one meeting, the department head at a company function comes over to me and says, you're Darryl Jenkins, aren't you? And I said, yeah. You went from customer service into distribution. I said, yeah. He says, why did you do that? I says, because if I have both of these jobs under my belt, then I can have your job. And he looked at me, white man, right? He looked at me and says, wow. And it was that in and of itself was huge, because I told my boss that I wanted his job, and you need to be looking out for me because I'm coming for you. So it helped me, because ultimately what I ended up doing is I also put out my resume out there, and the phone company came and they said, hey, we want to hire you. So they were trying to reach me through my gas company address, and the company was hiding all their messages. They wouldn't tell me that they were calling me. And so when I finally they called my my father-in-law at his house and said, hey, we're trying to reach Darryl about a job. And boom, that's how I found out about it. So, yeah, it was interesting all the way through. And then when I went to the phone company and interviewed, this white lady was trying to set me up for a service rep job, and in the interview. And I found out that started asking questions, and I says, no, I'm here for a management position. She says, oh, she hadn't even looked at my paperwork. And so the next thing I know, they put me into the college pool, and it was an ongoing negotiation. All the stuff I learned in business school and how to negotiate your position, and I had negotiated the top salary in my management class. And it was interesting to see all that stuff come to fruition. But by and large, it was Pepperdine was the great opportunity in terms of School of Business and Management, and taught me so much that I was ready and prepared to go into that job. Just not like going out of college, but I was prepared. They did a good job.
Well, that is wonderful. Now, the thing that I'm picking up is you were working a job. Someone says, are you going to do this the rest of your life? So that was kind of put a seed in your mind about, I could do better.
Yes.
You went through the process, you went through the training, and it sounds like when you said annual reviews, are you talking about performance appraisals, like how well you did your job?
Yeah, they weren't even doing it then. This was in 1970, 1968, 60, 70. And I don't know if they even cared about doing it. They had their own internal process of how they promoted people. And there was a stepping stone into management was called QC. If you were good in your job, they would make you a QC supervisor. Then you go out and inspect work. And I thought was doing really good. And the QC supervisor came out one day and visited me on the job and was asking me about what I want to do with my career. And I said, "Oh, they're looking at me."
Right,
So,
right.
but they were taking their sweet time. And I got to
Well,
tell you, go
yeah.
ahead.
No, no. Go ahead and tell your story because I was just going to follow up with another question, but I'm interested in hearing your the rest of that story.
Well, I had to learn something about myself. Right there in the 70s, it was cool to have a big afro. And
Hmm.
Sly and the Family Stone, you know how he dressed with. So they moved me inside the corporate offices to dispatch, to learn the dispatch, to run the dispatch of all the work. So one day I came in like Sly and the Family Stone with the big afro with all the crazy garb on.
The bell
And
bottoms, the platform shoes.
yeah, I was smoking, man. And then what was interesting is that even the sisters that were in there looked at me. They didn't give me the, "Ooh, he's looking good." They're going like, "Oh man, this dude," you could tell I had done something wrong.
Mm.
And they didn't keep me up there that much longer, but I had an experience where I had to do something. And I knew a little Spanish, but not much, but I saved this guy over the phone with my little bit
Mm.
broken Spanish. And the boss came out and said, "Wow, that was terrific." But
Hmm.
long and short is I found out that you got to look around.
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
corporate environment was not Sly and the Family Stone.
Okay.
And they couldn't see me for seeing, a radical brother.
Hmm.
And that was hard in a conservative organization. Go ahead, man.
Right. Well, the thing I was thinking about is you said you had to, at one point, you were in one track and you had to step back to a lower track, so you could learn both sides of the business.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about with our leaders, because sometimes people think the upward trajectory is always just a straight line. But you said, I got to give ground to gain ground
Yes,
with the
exactly.
thought of gaining enough information to have a picture of the whole organization and enhancing your knowledge so that you'd be, for the long game, be in a position to run the company. Is that what I heard
Yes,
you say?
that's exactly what I said.
And that is great because that's what our listeners need to know, especially the young ones, that there are pitfalls as you go along the way, but sometimes you've got to think long term rather than just always shooting straight to the top. So I think that's a great, great idea. Now, the thing that we've talked about so far is how you work through things. Now, you are a leader. When did you realize that you were a leader? What were the kind of things that you did to say that I have the capacity to not only grow myself, but I can help others?
Okay, so now you're going to push me back over into now the telephone company
Okay.
where I was hired through their management hire program, and it was looked like it was a minority hire. Back in those days they had affirmative action, right?
Hmm.
So there was Mexicans, blacks, and other minorities that came through this management hire program, and we
Hmm.
were a cohort of sorts. And I was sent from LA down to San Diego, which I didn't know that San Diego was pretty racist, right? Back
Okay.
in the 70s. But they, I had a white manager come up to me and says, "Do you know you're the first black supervisor we had in this office?" And I go like, "Really?"
Hmm.
And then I didn't, because I didn't think anything about it. I didn't see the color issue being a barrier. I was just
Hmm.
a person, right?
Right.
So we used to have this wall of books, and they were calling the BSPs, the Bell System Practice. Everything
Hmm.
about telephone service was in these books. And there was a
Okay.
directory, one book in the front that you had to read to learn how to get to your answers, or the technology, or the wiring specs and all that stuff. So one day they gave me a very simple project. They just tested me, and the guy says, "Hey, can you make this phone bell mute?" I go, "Whoa." So I said, "Well, I think I can." He says, "Good." He said, "The BSPs are right over there." So I went over to the BSPs and went through the index and found the wiring schemes and the schematics, and found for silencing the bell and what that was, and sat down on my desk and silenced the bell. And you have to move this wire to this post, to this post, to that post. So
Mm-hmm.
when I was successful, I told him to come over, and you make it ring, and then you turn the little thing underneath. If you remember the old phones, and you'd lower the bell,
Right.
but you could actually shut off the ring so it didn't ring. So he says, "Wow." And they were all impressed. These were the
Mm-hmm.
top managers in that garage. And then he says, "Let me show you something." And he took his long nose pliers, and he bent the ringer, this wire on the ringer. And he said, "If you bend this, and now hit the little wheel," and it didn't ring. Now I spent 2 hours silencing this phone with the technology the way it was supposed to be, and he came over, and within 2 minutes had the thing silenced. He says, "I just wanted to show you there's other ways than just being smart."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he became my friend, and all of them respected me because I was able to do it through the schematics. But there's always a shortcut some kind of way that works, and that taught me a lot about leadership. Now, if
Okay.
you transition that stuff, that mindset, to your installers, the telephone guys that went to your house, they can be better installers. So there were a lot of situations like that I used and utilized to become number one. And then I'll tell you one more thing, and then I'll let you give me the questions. But there was they kept trying to screw me, man, to fire me. You got to understand that I was the only black man, so everything
Right.
I did was like under the microscope, and they were trying to get me fired. So they would give me projects all the time. They'd say, "Hey, who wants to introduce this?" And so I'd look around, nobody raised their hand. I'd raise my hand. I knew nothing about telephony, but I'd raise my hand, and I figured if I could learn it, study it, I could fix it. I could do it. So when they call it modularization, like when you plug your phone back in the day when you had the cords that you plug into your phone, plug into the wall. Well, they said, "Darryl, okay, you're going to implement what they call modularization for the phone service." And I go,
Right.
for all of San Diego? He says, "Yeah." So I go, "Okay." So I figured it out, learned it, taught it to my people. We were number one in modularization.
Okay.
And then secondly, they had a project where they needed a new force management program, and one guy went on disability. It's too hard for him, and one guy was sick and he couldn't do it. And they guess who they gave it to? They
Mm-hmm.
gave it to me. They said, "Darryl, implement this force management program." So I go, "Wow." So I learned to talk to people. This bottom line is I'd go to staff. Nobody would go to staff. Most people said they knew what was going on. So I'd go and listen to people. And here's what you do. Here's what you got to do. And I'd implement it my way, but I learned how to do it. And that really got me through the phone company. I did things that most people were unsuccessful, couldn't implement, because you take your lessons and then use common sense and talk to people, and it would usually turn out that I would be successful.
Now, one thing because you mentioned that when you learned how to do it, you helped your team
Yeah,
implement.
right.
So, what techniques did you use to manage? I'm assuming a diverse staff.
Yes. Well, it was always about First of all, knowing your people, because everybody, like you said, we all don't learn the same. Some people have an ability to do several different things, but they do it their way and they understand it their way. So the challenge for me was, how do I impart wisdom and information so that a person can uh, receive it and then be excited about it and then want to do it their way? Because ultimately the end goal is getting the job done. It wasn't about doing it the Bell system way, as that they used to say all the time. So they always gave me the worst crew. I had the first female installer, Patty. I'll never forget her. She was all upset because she was a woman and she's trying to do this job, and she's always trying to impress me that she was a man. I said, Patty, just be yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Skills or you wouldn't be here. And so once we became sort of friends, Patty just moved and shaken. So then she started whooping the male guys on performance, and that I use that to get these other guys to push themselves. So I said, oh, Patty's going to be number one this week. Patty's going to be this. So I was building her up and challenging them, and then I started giving her opportunities because she was number one. And then they start saying, well, I want to be number one. Okay, well, you got to do these things. Then they started, well, how she learned? I says, I'm working with it. Because a lot of people first of all, didn't trust you as a Black supervisor. Well, who are you? What do you know?
Mm-hmm.
Why are you here? And you always have to, as a Black man, you always have to fight the tide, but you don't have to fight it and get upset. You become smart about what you're doing. You become knowledgeable about what it is you're doing. You figure out all the different politics in the system, because there was people that were trying to kill me. Even my compadres,
Mm-hmm.
my supervisor compadres were throwing curves at me, telling me the wrong thing, messing up my crew. So here's the one that I really like. So I went to staff. They had a performance matrix that I used to ask people about. Nobody seemed to know. So I went to staff and took the matrix and says, how do you manage all of this stuff? What are we supposed to be doing out here? And sure enough, I found out that nobody was doing it right. Everybody's struggling. So I learned how to manage the numbers, to do the right things in terms of procedures. And sure enough, in about a week, we started becoming the number one group in the garage, and we were the last when I took over the unit. And the next thing I know, we were number one. People couldn't understand it. Our numbers were screaming. I mean, they were like so high they had my numbers, my whole unit audited. There's no way
Mm.
that you can make these kinds of numbers. And what was interesting is when they called staff to come audit me, guess who came and audited me? The same guy
Patty?
who taught me how to do it.
Oh, I
And,
see. Okay.
and he came in and he says, oh, and he winked at me. And he says, Darryl Jenkins, okay, let me see your paperwork. And he says, yep, A number one. And then I was the man. I had all the numbers. I was doing everything right. And then they just jumped on me like crazy. They tried to kill me, man, in terms of, racism and a whole bunch of other stuff. But
But
we got through it.
before we get to that, I want to just sum up something, and then we're going to get to how you dealt with those obstacles. But it sounded like that there were specific information following the steps that needed to be taken. Other people who were failing were not following those, but you took the extra effort to learn the correct steps, and you worked with your people. It sounds like almost individually, to give them the things they
Yes,
needed, and then
yes,
let them figure out how to do it. Would that be
absolutely.
how you managed?
Yeah, I'd take them on one by one. I'd go out and ride with them. And I said,
Mm-hmm.
okay, here's how you start your job. Here's how you handle your roadblocks. And here's how you manage the numbers within those roadblocks. And if there is a problem in the central office, you charge your time to the central office, not to installation time, because that just kills your index. That's what the guy taught me. And then they would
Right.
go out and they're supposed to go fix their problem. So it was one by one by one. And then they worked harder knowing that they knew how to be successful and how to be number one. It was amazing what happened to our team. And then after the district staff reviewed my stuff, they made me train all the other supervisors on how to do this so they could train their teams.
Well,
And
that is great.
yeah,
That, but
it
because the
was
thing,
interesting.
because I think the thing of it is that that approach worked because you actually empowered the people.
Yes.
Now, the one thing I want to do before our time is out is when people start to throwing curveballs at you and underhanded stuff, what kind of things happened and how did you deal with it?
Well, first of all, I'm a proverbial guy that wants to be successful,
Hmm.
and I want to take on every challenge, but I want to be smart about what it is that I do. I want to make sure that that I have all the knowledge that I need to be successful, and then try to apply it accordingly. Um, they used to do stuff like said for training as a new manager, I had to go sit on a pole. We used to call it A cuts, and you go sit on a telephone pole all day and transfer cable splices. You talk about a tedious job. Plus, on the telephone pole, you got those we call them steps, the metal rods that stick out the side,
Right.
and when after an hour, your legs are almost numb. So you have to learn how to move around, step around. But it's a killer day. But I said, okay, I'm going to do it. And then so that when I come in the evening, they say, so how many A cuts you do? And I found out what the kind of going rate was, and I'd always want to do more. And I just yell out, "Oh, I did the 100 A cuts." You go, "What?" So I was always trying to prove myself to be better than them, and which we do as Black people. We
Right.
always have to be a bit more better than the average guy. But that takes a lot of, first of all, stamina. It takes a lot of mental 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 understanding that what is your success for doing that, and that's just your own personal satisfaction that you were better than them, because nobody else is going to pat you on the back. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And so it stops them from being able to go to the boss and say he ain't doing his job.
Right.
So you, after always, as a Black man, I guess it hasn't changed. I mean, it has changed a bit, because you see people in different fields that are doing very well, but it's not a lot of us doing that. And so I guess it's something that young people, and I when I think about young people and all they want is music and hip hop and want to be cool, at some point you have to figure out that cool is okay, and you got to learn how to talk out of both sides of your mouth. At some point you can talk street, and some point you have to talk with an educated mind. So it was a challenge to figure out how to be successful in a world that wasn't really wanting you to be successful.
Well, it sounds like you figured it out. So I think that what you provided is extremely helpful. And as I always say, 30 minutes goes by so fast.
Are we
So
done?
we're at 28 minutes on our 30-minute session.
Oh, I
So
thought we
you've
had an
definitely
hour, man.
imparted a lot of information for that. So is there anything else you'd like to share before we sign off?
Yeah, I just want to say that, my career has been all those challenges and more. In terms of, one thing that I got to say, share is that I used to raise my hand a lot. I mean,
Hmm.
they would throw these projects at me, and they say,
Hmm.
who wants to do this? And nobody raised their hand. I raised my hand.
Hmm.
So when the president it was Pacific Bell at the time, says, "Who knows data?" And I'd had some data communications training through Pepperdine, and I raised my hand, and so they pointed out, say, "You, and you. You're going to help us open up a new organization called the Data Communications Group," and that put me in charge of doing development and rollout of internet services for all of Northern California.
Mm.
And that was huge, man, because it was all technology and training of the people and setting up the trucks and the offices and everything. So what I'm trying to get to is I raised my hand. I wasn't afraid of failure.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? I never was afraid of failure. And still to this day, failure is in small terms is a learning lesson, but I never
Right.
put myself in a position where I had chronic failure where I'm just gonna, fall on my
Mhm.
feet and die. And it's not in my, not in
Right.
my,
And that is great. And it sounds like the take home message is raise your hand if you want to succeed.
yeah. Don't be afraid of the big challenge. You can always be
Absolutely.
successful.
Right. And thank you so much, Darryl. This has been very valuable. I know our listeners will gain a lot out of this.
I hope so.
This is WRM Work Relationships Matter. I'm your host, the Edward Jones, a certified life coach. If you want to learn more about my coaching business, go to www.prodestinycoaching.com. Darryl, have a great day and look forward to continuing to learning more from you as we go through our paths crossed in different areas. Have a great day.
Thanks, Ed. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Okay, and we're out.